Right. So we've been building up. Just to remind us that the overall theme is discipline, God's blueprint for building families, building dynasties as well. God's a God of generations, building organizations, businesses, building communities, and even nations. Now, today we are looking at part 6, and we're just emphasizing the role of national discipline. We'll look at Old Testament examples. We'll also look at, and there are many, we'll look at New Testament, not New Testament, more modern times. The principles, as I just want to underscore again, these principles cut across. They are because God created the world. God created the world in a certain way. Now we are tenants on the earth. We may set up our own rules and so on, but God has certain overarching rules that reign. And I think the more we look at this, the more we realize that these rules apply. And they don't respect who you are. They don't respect who you are or who you say you are. I think one of the things we need to come to terms with is that in much of Africa, though we say we are Christian, in a country like this with 80-something% people calling themselves Christians, if we do not follow the ordinances, the statutes, the precepts of the Lord, it doesn't matter. We will not get the kind of nations or communities we want. Other countries may not know God, but they follow those precepts, and those are countries you want to go to. So it's time for us now to match our faith with our actions. It's very sad in a country to have so many people call themselves believers, but when you look in their lives, you just get shocked, Nations don't rise on charisma. I think that's one of the things that is believed today. You get a charismatic leader, and that builds the nation. Unless that nation, that leader can guide the people he's leading, an organization, by the I'm talking very broadly here, unless he can guide them along the precepts of the Lord, or in this case, we are summarizing that as discipline. That's though we know discipline can have other bases. But as we've seen, the laws of God promised that when you follow those laws and the commandments, and He promised Israel will be on top of all the nations. So they don't rise on charisma. It's discipline systems. Discipline systems. Organizations are built by discipline systems. Law and order hold organizations together. And nations rise on collective discipline, not just a few individuals. When the whole nation begins to get disciplined, things begin to move. Where there's no order, there is national ruin. So we're praying for the nation. I know we pray for peace. We pray for these things. I just pray that I pray. And this week we have, I think it was Saturday when we were focusing on national discipline. We need to begin praying for the deeper things. Because all these other things, we've been through war and we don't want to war again. We don't want this, we don't want that. We want economic. Let me tell you, if the question of discipline is sorted, many of those things will be sorted out by themselves, because they follow through. Of course, we still have two other things, but they follow through. And again, reminding us, I'm a teacher, so I want to keep reminding you. It's not take time to remind you. We've looked at the 7 parts, the law of the Lord, the foundation of discipline. And again, all these things are fortunately available on YouTube. You can get them on the UGN channel. You can also go on my website. There are links that take you to the UGN channel, so you can watch and follow them. Just revise them again. The commandments of the Lord. We looked at discipline in the family, raising generations. And then we looked at the precepts, paying attention to details, critical. God is very detailed. God is the God of centuries, but is also a God of the second. There are things He can accomplish in a second, which, when He says, God says, let there be light, there was light. I don't know how many seconds that took. Let there be this. God is a God of both the big and the small. And God is interested in the detail. And then we look at the statutes of the Lord, establishing identity and order. And last week we looked at the ordinances, building justice in leadership. And today we are continuing with the national discipline. National discipline. We are praying. This is a time of praying for the nation. We are praying for governance in the nation. And as we look into the future, this is one of the key things that must be, if we can build a disciplined generation, then we know that the future is more secured. If the next generation is disorderly and chaotic, you have concerns about the future of the country. So we need to invest a lot of time praying about this, but also those of us who have, wherever God has given us authority, you do what you are called to do. And then next week we shall pull it all together when we look at the rewards. Remember, the psalmist says, in keeping them, there is great reward. We want to unpack that. There is great. What does God mean when he says there is great reward? When God says that, you pay attention. Anthony was talking about, I was going to give a reward for those who can remember the word. Well, I don't know what reward would have given, but sometimes there's a thug on the loose, and they say the police is giving a 10 million shilling award for anyone who will give. Now, even those who don't have begin to look because they want the reward. God promises us that if we keep his precepts, his commandments, his statutes, there is a great reward. Personal life, family life, organizational life, national life, community life. That is something we need to look for and say, hey, I want this great reward God is talking about. And that is, again, something that the different words that we've looked at, the law, the commandments, the precepts, the statutes, and the ordinances. And as we've said, those are clusters of words, but though used interchangeably, they carry a distinct set of meanings. Okay. So I won't go over that again. Let's move straight to. Well, this is a quick review, a very quick review. You are looking for that word, the Hebrew word for ordinances, mishpatim, in case you missed it. Judgments, and we said in the Greek there's a dichomia, which is a similar sort of word. And the reason we look at this again, for those who may be new, the Old Testament was the original language of what we call the earlier covenant, not the Old Testament. I'm being corrected. Is Hebrew. So that's why those who do theology in depth study Hebrew, because you want to get the actual meaning in the original language without the confusion of translation. In the New Testament, the language was penned down on was Greek. And that's why people study Greek in detail just to be sure that the meaning is correct. And we said God's judicial rulings uphold justice, civil order, and moral governance in both personal and societal life. And we did mention that these two statutes, which call us to live apart, they provide a full picture of God's rule. They shape identity. We are called to live apart in obedience, in holiness, even when we don't fully understand. And ordinances, excuse me, ordinances bring out the call to lead and judge wisely. Okay, fairness, resolving conflicts, and protecting the vulnerable. Those two words appear together quite often. Huh? Statutes and rules, statutes and rules, statutes and rules. And God made that promise in the book of Deuteronomy when Moses was setting the people into the new land they were going to. He was telling them that if they would listen to the statutes and the rules that he was teaching them, they would live, they would go in, they would take possession of the land, and also, as a result, they would become like an example to the other nations. People will say, what great nation is there that has a God so near? So another thing that this does for us, it brings God's presence in that place. It's because heaven is run on order. Heaven is not chaotic. Chaos comes from the other side. So when on earth we have order, the kingdom is manifesting, on the earth. All right. We use the example of Solomon, how God gave him wisdom, and he was able to make a judgment between the two prostitutes that were, fighting over a child, and he was able to go past, use the understanding of a mother's compassion to reveal the truth. So that's God anchored justice does not depend on just intelligence, but spirit-led wisdom. And we also made a statement that when God's judgments are on the earth, people learn righteousness. Okay, all this is a recap. Then we also linked up with the fact that God's rule is based on righteousness and justice. Those two are connected to statutes and ordinances. Righteousness and justice, I call them twins. Whenever you see one, you see the other. Whenever you see one, you see the other in the Bible. Maybe your eyes will begin to pick that up. And we use examples of the Magna Carta. We use examples of Finland, and the fact that these are, well, at least Finland in modern days is one that over the years has been influenced by Christianity, and they've adopted things. Right now, they are not, as godly as they were in the past, but the laws are still reflecting, the kind of things God would want in a nation. And guess what? Any nation that goes in that direction just begins to stand out. It's just the education system. We looked at all the different things, how it came to be where it is today. And we looked at the rewards. So we already began touching on the question of rewards for nations. And we ended with the the statement that the ordinances of the Lord are not just ancient rules, they are eternal principles of justice fulfilled in Christ and applied by spirit leadership today. So today we are moving on to the whole question of national discipline, something we should be praying about. And if we're going to be effective in our prayers, we need to look at things honestly. There is no point keeping things under the blanket, under wraps. In his book, Jim Collins called the group Built to, he wrote a number of books. There's one called Built to Last, but the one I'm referring to is called Good to Great. He studies 11 Fortune 500 companies in the US that made transition over time from being very ordinary organizations. Some of them had as long as 100 years of history, and they were just ordinary. Then at some point, they begin to become outstanding. Outstanding. It's a great book to read. I highly recommend it. It's called Good to Great. It's one of the books we use in the training at the Institute for National Transformation, the Oxford program, which is a 6-month program. And it brings out the fact that, again, discipline. Discipline is the key thing, the underpinning thing that moved organizations which were average to become outstanding. And by outstanding, they outperformed the Coca-Colas of this world. These big companies that you hear about, the General Electrics, they outperformed them and sustained it for, I think it was 11 years, just sustained it. It was not just a sudden 1 year they were doing well, no. And he narrowed down, it was a very empirical research, he narrowed it down to 3 things: disciplined people, disciplined thinking, disciplined action. Discipline. Okay. So no nation, if you apply to nations, no company, no nation becomes great by accident. It's not just by resources, by population, by geography that a country thrives, but national discipline. Another country, this time a country we study is the country of Singapore, which I haven't referred to much. Maybe I'll refer to in my next message. The structured commitment of citizens and institutions to uphold law, justice, and order. In a country like Singapore, there is a law against chewing gum. You're not allowed to chew gum. You're not. And you can be in serious trouble chewing gum. Those countries, if you play around with drugs, they kill you. There are people who have gone there thinking, hey, maybe because I come from this country and that country. There was a time when the Prime Minister of UK was pleading with the Singaporeans not to execute a British citizen who had been caught with drugs. And the Singaporeans were saying, look, we apply this law to our citizens. Tell us why we shouldn't apply it to yours. Our own citizens, when we catch them with drugs, execution. Now, even the thugs know you don't go to Singapore. The other one is China. China is very disciplined. Never mind what you think about the other things that they do. They're extremely disciplined. And you're caught with drugs, it does not matter who you are. Recently, I was told a story, which I can't go into details because of the sensitivities of the people involved. But a son of a leading figure in one of the African countries was actually executed. He was caught with drugs and he just disappeared. The next thing they know, they are telling the parents to come for the body. Or I think they allowed them to get some. They don't even allow to get the body sometimes. But because of this position, I think they allowed them to get the body. You don't mess around. You do not mess around. And people know it, you know. So it is upholding law, justice. This discipline serves as the invisible holding or scaffolding of civilization. Without it, even economic progress stalls, governance will fail, unity unravels. And this is why we need to be praying that God will bring this into our nation in a very strong way, because it is our future. If we don't get disciplined as a country, more disciplined. I mean, I love the discipline in the army. In fact, I really wish we could get every Ugandan just to spend 1 year in the army, just 1 year. We'll have a different country. Countries that do it, think of Singapore, think of South Korea, even Israel. National service, every citizen has to go through it. By the time you spent a year or two in the army, then you now go to university, you're a different person. So I'm one of those who actually decry the fact that we lost what had begun earlier. That Chankwanzi training, for people politicize it, but it was good. It was good in many ways. It may have had its issues, but it was one, and I've known people who have gone through it, who say that 1 year's changed their lives. By the time they went to university, they were very different people. But when you have university students who are rioting, they are smashing windows, and you have university lecturers who are behaving the way they want to behave, we are not going very far, So let's pray. God knows how we'll do it, but there must be national discipline for us to get to where we're supposed to be. Just a reminder too from Psalm 138, verse 2, where it says, I'll worship towards your holy temple and praise your name for your loving kindness and your truth. For you've magnified your word above all your name. I like the rendering of the New King James Version. I think it's the New King James Version. It says you've magnified your word above all your name. In other words, God obeys his word. The word used for name is the word Imra there. Or I think I'm looking for the word used for word, your word. It's Imra, commandments. Used 29 times. It is just word, 29 times in its usage, according to Strong's Concordance. 7 times is speech. At one time, it talks about commandment. But basically, God's word is his name. When God has said something, he will not violate it. He will not violate it. And God himself obeys, and that's the standard, Now, there's a very sad story told about in the book of the Judges. It says it's a picture of just total anarchy, in Judges 21, verse 25 says, in those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Now, can I render it a bit differently, which will make sense what we are this season? In those days, there was no governance. There was no governance in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. This is the closing statement of the book of Judges, and it captures the society which is just unraveled. It's lost its moral compass, yeah, and there's no leadership. In our day, political leadership would say. Those days it was monarchy, but there was no divine authority as well in the hearts of the people. And this phrase, the phrase in those days there was no king in Israel, appears 4 times. 4 times, the book of the Judges, in chapter 17, chapter 18, chapter 19, and then chapter 21, they add that phrase, everyone did what was right in his own eyes. In the other parts, they tell us there was no king, the leadership had failed, governance had failed. So everyone just decided what they would do. Everyone, there were no guidelines. Yeah? People just did what they wanted. So it keeps getting reminded, and it gets louder and louder until it tells us that, when there is no righteous leadership in a home, when there's no righteous leadership in a school, um, things drift towards chaos. I remember even the school I went to for secondary, it was during at that time there had been a rapid change in leadership when Idi Amin chased the Europeans and Asians. They all left. And by the time I got into school, there was chaos. There was chaos, people were doing what they wanted. The class break time the last lesson before break time, students were out of class. They were going to get break, sometimes in neighboring villages. A few years later, they brought in a headmaster who was strict. He was so strict, the school students were in shock. When he walked into assembly, students were just talking. He said, I'm going to walk out and walk back in again. And everyone stands up. People thought he was joking. He did it. They didn't comply. He said, I'll do it one more time. People who didn't stand up, or they were immediately punished. The school was shocked into order. And guess what? In the years when the school was disorderly, the performance of the school went down. When this man came into the realm of the school began performing again. It is just, you can see it everywhere. You don't even have to be a prophet to talk about this. You can see anywhere discipline comes in, people begin to do better. So in this time, Israel did whatever they wanted. It was drifting towards chaos. And in this time of the judges, you can read the book. You see there was no king. There was just chaos. The stories told there are just terrible. There's a story about the Levite's concubine in Judges 19. I don't want to go into it, but it's one of those you say, what is going on in this country? You go back and read Judges 19 and see, So instead of being guided by God's law, individuals were making decisions on personal preference, on emotion, what felt right in their eyes, Today we have a term called relativism. Anything goes. Situational ethics. Ethics depend on the situations or you're in. Truth is subjective. You can define right and wrong for yourself. This is really a recipe for chaos. This leads to confusion, division, destruction. So Israel, as you'd expect, degenerated into a society where tribes were attacking each other, vengeance, murder, all kinds of terrible things in the book of Judges, So today, this is a parallel for us, and it's a warning for us. When nations don't have discipline, corruption sets in, impunity thrives. Someone will just come in because they are so and so, and we've seen this. Remember my first exposure for it, I was a little kid, but I did witness a bit of Idi Amin's reign. I did witness it. I was too young to understand. But this is the kind of thing you have. Impunity. There are names that I'll never forget, names like Malia Mungu. The guys would just show up and they would do whatever they want, And, the country went into chaos from a very orderly 60s to a very chaotic 70s. Again, when leaders in any place fail to uphold justice, people follow what's convenient, not what is right, what's convenient. Absolutes are cast off. And eventually, organizations, families collapse, organizations collapse, even nations collapse. So this verse is really a stark warning for us. It's calling for submission to divine order. Okay, submission, divine order. What eventually happened here, God's answer to this, as you know, was through Samuel, Prophet Samuel. God began to set the stage for the rise of King David, a man after God's own heart. And we can also trust God that in this time we're in, King David's greater son, Jesus, the world is being set. The Samuel company God is raising to set the stage for the reign of the King of Kings. I'm not talking about the rapture, by the way, but I'm talking about God's kingdom manifesting on the earth. Another time we see a biblical example is in the times of Nehemiah. The story of Nehemiah is a great story in disciplined leadership. When you follow the story, Jerusalem was in ruins. Its walls, which symbolized protection and dignity, had been broken for many years. Nehemiah was burdened by this national disgrace. He led a revival. And I don't want to use the word revival now. I want revival, yes, but revival must translate to reformation. Please remember that when you pray for revival. I do not want a revival where we just have big churches and big meetings and we have Holy Spirit experiences and we fall under the power and all those sort of things. Those are okay. But if it ends there, then what is the benefit? It must translate to reformation. Even Nehemiah's prayer. Nehemiah was burdened. You read Nehemiah, those first chapters where he received the burden. He prayed for 4 months. He prayed. But what was the result? It resulted in action. It resulted in the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem. That is reformation. And today, as we pray for God's revival, God visiting the nation, I'm not just praying for revival. I'm praying God will do it because, yes, we need spiritual revival. We need all those experiences. But as somebody said, you don't want to be baptized. You go out, go in a dry sinner in the water, you come out a wet sinner. Nothing has changed. God, there must be transformation. There must be reformation. So we see Nehemiah here reorganizing families, each one building specific sections of the wall. They got ownership. They became accountable. He even organized security. You read the story. The workers carried tools in one hand and weapons in the other. They were ready to defend. Today, you can talk of spiritual warfare and work, not just spiritual warfare, but getting involved in the spheres of society, positively influencing society. This is one of the things the president has often challenged us about. And we need to listen because we're saying, you people, I've seen what has happened in other countries. It's one particular breakfast Pastor Laban keeps talking about, where he talked about, I've seen what happened in the US. It was believers. South Korea, it was believers who were catalysts for the change. What are you people doing? And that's a challenge for us. We may criticize leadership, but there's a real challenge for us as believers. With the numbers that we have and the big churches we have, how are we impacting society? Then we see resistance to corruption in this story as well. Nehemiah refused bribes. They tried to bribe him. He refused. He resisted manipulation. He kept his team focused on the mission. And that tells you any leader will be bribed because there are always people who benefit in the chaos. There are people who benefit in the status quo. Even in Nehemiah's day, they were there. Many of our brethren who have gone into leadership have found that. You're trying to bring change, but there's somebody who is benefiting greatly in the chaos. They threatened him with death. They even tried to lay traps for him. There's nothing new under the sun. He refused bribes. And then he completed the work with excellence. Despite the opposition and the threats, he rebuilt the wall in 52 days. So this is a great story. It's a great story. And it also shows that discipline can rebuild dignity. Discipline can inspire purpose. Discipline can revive nations. You can draw many lessons from the story of Nehemiah. Now, there's one particular city. I want to give 3 examples, which are from out of the Bible, just to again highlight the point. There's a city called Sparta, which I want to introduce you in. This was during the time of the Greek Empire. There are 2 cities talked about. There's Sparta and there's Athens. And this particular city was established around the 10th century before Common Era. It became a very dominant military power in Greece by the 6th century and reached its peak in the 5th century. And eventually they were defeated by the group called the Thebans. And it maintained its political independence until the Roman conquest of Greece. That was in the 2nd century. Now, this particular city had a very interesting way of raising the next generation. They trained children in discipline from very early childhood. Their system was a bit, you may call it crude, but it had its results, They had a system where they emphasized self-control, endurance, and obedience. They're a bit extreme, okay? But they created a very resilient society that could force any foe with unity. It is very well known, and when you read its accounts, you can read about it later. Very strict discipline, they were warlike, and they had order. Athens was the other city, which was more philosophical. They were more into philosophy and the arts. The Spartans prioritized military strength, loyalty to the state, and social cohesion. And the discipline was not an option in this place. Okay, it was a very core value in every area of their lives, from children to adulthood. So they began very early. They had a system called a gogi, and the boys joined at age 7. Can you imagine? So you think of your 7-year-old, those of you who have children, 7-year-old going to live in the barracks. They let you stay with mommy up to age 7. Up age 7, mommy says bye. The boy goes to live in the barracks, and they begin training them in obedience, endurance, stealth, combat, and survival. They have taken through very harsh conditions. Limited food, they would starve them. Limited clothing, they said we must toughen these people's character, build resilience. Now, they were also not very moral. They were actually encouraged to steal food so that they can learn how to escape. Stealth. How do you steal someone's food? So it was not based on what we call golden morals. How do you steal without being caught? So the problem was not stealing, but failing to get food without being caught. So they were taught stealth. Now the result was disciplined soldiers who were very loyal. They were not afraid of hardship at all. This is one reason I say now, the army, I know in the military, they train on discipline. And this is something we miss out. We really miss out, which I hope one day will be brought, but has to take the whole citizenry somehow. Just give them 1 year in the military. We will have a different country in a very short time. In a very short time, because the society becomes disciplined. My son, when he finishes, one of my sons, when he finished his high school, said he wanted to have an experience. So we let him have an experience. And I tell you, the boy who went into this, I forget, was it 3 months experience? And the boy who came out were two different people. We could see it, two different people. He had lost so much weight, but every time he told us, Daddy, when I look at people, I just see indiscipline. When I look, I walk on the streets, I just see indiscipline everywhere. 3 months of immersion. And that just changed his trajectory completely. So these Spartans did that sort of thing, though they were, as you said, they were crude and they overdid it. But that was the impact. They lived under a system where luxury was forbidden, simplicity, self-restraint. Now, for us, we are on the opposite. Our generation now, which has grown, and some of us grew up in hardship. We grew up where there was scarcity. You learned how to get by. I was laughing with my wife some time back. Some of the schools we went to, there was no water. You had to learn how to bathe with very little water. And we did it, But now you sit under a shower and the water flows and you even forget the shower. Now, these are not bad in themselves, but we must find ways of instilling discipline. We must. Otherwise, our kids grow up very entitled. They are very entitled. They think they deserve that life, whatever life it is. And you see it in the generation coming up. Very, very entitled. These guys in Sparta forbade luxury. And they went to the extreme. They ate meals together. Even the kings joined. They joined everyone in eating. They downplayed personal wealth to avoid class divisions and promote unity. Military service was compulsory for men until 60. So you did not leave the military until 60. So this lifestyle, and again, there are some things taken to extreme here. I'm not advocating for what we're doing. I'm just using this illustration to show that they were able to build a very resilient society. They did not even bother putting up walls. People just knew them. You don't go to that place. If you don't want trouble to trouble you, don't go there. Women also lived under a unique discipline system. They were very strong physical training. They were encouraged to be outspoken, to manage homes while men served in war. And they also had order. They had a council of elders and an assembly. So just read about Sparta. There's a lot written about Sparta. You'll find the literature. Excuse me. If you broke laws of the state, you were either sent to exile or you were killed. Even kings could be tried. So what happened there was that they became a very feared society. There's a story told where 300 of them resisted thousands of Persian troops. Thousands of Persian troops were trying to take over take them over. Okay, the Battle of Thermopylae. You may read about the Battle of Thermopylae. Okay. Eventually, because of the rigid system, they declined eventually. But the key thing we're getting out here is that it's one of the historical examples of how national discipline can forge resilience, unity, and strength. Okay? And there are things that can be drawn from Sparta. But more recent examples, let me draw from more recent examples of two countries that were totally destroyed, but they rebounded very, very powerfully. And again, discipline was at the core of it. Most of us will know about the World War, Germany. Some years ago, I visited Dresden. Dresden was a big city in Germany, which was totally bombed. When the Allied forces eventually turned the tide of the war, they wanted to teach Germany a lesson. They carpet bombed their cities. Our Germany was in ashes. Okay, so when you read about Germany, that was 1945, 1944, not even 100 years from there, But Germany was able to revamp its system. Of course, they had help, the Marshall Plan, which was you heard about, they were help, but it was more than the Marshall Plan. It was the country that was united in discipline. By the end of the war, the major cities you read about, the Berlin, Hamburg, Dresden. I've been be able to visit at least Berlin and Dresden. They were reduced to rubble. Okay, there was continuous bombing. When the Allied forces just dropped carpet bombs after carpet, they basically devastated. It is said that 20% of all homes were destroyed. 20%. Transport, communication, bridges were dismantled. Factories were bombed. Those are the pillars of its economy. It is estimated that about 8 to 10 million Germans were dead. 8 to 10 million were dead by the end of the war. Many were wounded or missing. And then 12 million ethnic Germans were expelled from Eastern Europe, and they were resettled in West Germany. So millions of families were separated, displaced, food shortages, mass homelessness, psychological trauma. And what had also happened is that the Nazi regime had actually destroyed the moral compass. There was no functioning government. The legal system, the national identity were totally gone. There was guilt because of what had happened. Now, despite this chaos, especially West Germany, we have visited both East and West Germany several times, maybe not several, about 3-4 times on both sides. But both of them were West Germany, especially the ethos of discipline, responsibility, and order. They accepted defeat. They faced the reality. One of the things I was talking about, the book by Jim Collins, he talks about facing brutal facts. Change begins when you face things. You don't sugarcoat it. You don't say it is okay because you like so and so. Face the facts. What is the reality? So these people, you may have heard the name of Konrad Adenauer, was the first chancellor of West Germany. They insisted on ethical governance, rule of law, rebuilding public trust, and then economic discipline. The other names you read about, strict financial and monetary discipline. And you hear of the economic miracle of the 1950s, just a few years after the war, 1950s, 1960s. Okay, they introduced a new currency soon after the war, and then they just began, emphasizing punctuality, work ethic. I remember my first time in Germany. That time I went to Dresden. I was trying to catch a flight I took a train from Dresden to Munich, and I had to connect to the airport. And everything was in German. I couldn't understand it. And I was looking at these trains. I had to be careful I get on the right train. The next train at 7:21, because it's an overnight train. I was driving in the morning. I had a few hours to get to the airport. At 7:21, the train arrives. and it stays for a few seconds, the doors close, it moves. I was just watching this and saying, oh my goodness. So exact time. And then years later, I went to visit dental practice, and people go for lunch break. And I would say lunch break, if the lunch break is an hour, 15 minutes before the break, people are running back to the office. 15 minutes before. I remember I traveled with Pastor Laban on that first trip, and Pastor Laban was supposed to speak in the meeting. So we went there, we got there at just about like 5 minutes to 6. To our utter shock, the church was full, everyone was seated. And we're saying, wow. So they said, no, here, if you arrive, if it is 6 and you arrive at 6, you're late. 15 minutes before, everyone is seated, So they enforce things like that. No wonder Germany is a powerhouse, the economic powerhouse of Europe, So they severely punish corruption, The public institutions were built with rigorous standards of service and so on. Education, reform, they emphasize values, not just getting high marks, values. Ethics, accountability. Schools instill national responsibility from a very, very early age. And a lot of other things you can read about post-war Germany. So what happened? What happened? Today, Germany stands as a testament to the power of, among other things, civic responsibility, national order. In just a few decades, within 2 decades, West Germany rose from ruin to become the 3rd largest economy in the world after that devastation. In just 2 decades, 20 years, it became the 3rd largest economy in the world. They were not talking about ancient Israel. We are talking about something that happened less than 100 years ago. Okay, if you talk of 1948, it's about 1925, maybe about 80 years ago. Now, another country that participated in the war, which was also equally devastated, was Japan. The Japan entered the war on September 22nd, 1940, when they invaded French Indochina, and they formed an alliance with Germany and Italy. 5 days later, they are called the Axis forces. Then they attacked Pearl Harbor, which was American territory, and so it was that attack that pulled America into the war, which America didn't want to. We've already talked about that Kaizen culture in Toyota, continuous improvement. So they were devastated, and it was terrible. You had to know about the atomic war bombing, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These were totally destroyed in 1945, August 1945. It is said over 200,000 people died instantly. Instantly. Today, when we have an accident and 30 people die, it is news. When 100 people die, it's a disaster. Imagine 200,000 people. Let me say it again. 200,000 people die in an instant. Radiation exposure. Cities were destroyed. The cities here about Tokyo, Osaka, over 60 cities were severely damaged. People were homeless, millions. The GDP fell to less than half its pre-war level. Infrastructure was demolished. There was food, there was starvation. Food, basic commodities were very scarce. The emperor was ruling at that time. Authority was dismantled. It was occupied by the US. General Douglas MacArthur, you may have read in history. Their government was dissolved. Total reorganization of state systems. Shame, national shame, war guilt, moral disorientation. But despite this, Japan's began to rise, driven by cultural discipline. Okay, there was money that came from the West, yes, but that money, we know money poured in a disorganized society will just go. Okay, strong institutional reforms, the will to rebuild, and Japanese society had deep roots, or they already had deep roots in their collectivism, which is importance, the common good, the respect for authority, obedience to authority. And there are a number of other things in their culture which emphasized honor, duty, self-sacrifice. They fell back to that, and they brought about education reforms. The education system was revamped, and again, value-based. I mean, you see videos today of Japanese kids sweeping their school first thing in the morning, There are a number of videos moving around, and I hope you can share some of those videos, those of you who have them. It starts from a very early age, and then they moved from military production in their factories. They began to manufacture cars and things like that. We talked about Kaizen already in one of the sessions. Japanese workers are known for punctuality. Again, I think I mentioned somebody who lived in Japan, one of our diplomats, who said where they lived, every morning you'll find the same people waiting for the bus. You can be sure they'll be there. It's like, it is like a song, a broken record happens. Every morning you're there, the same people are there, and the bus arrives on time, They're known for punctuality, for loyalty, and for precision and quality. So the companies like Toyota, Sony, Panasonic, they rose through disciplined innovation and long-term planning. Okay. So Japan is another example, okay, which of discipline. They began very poor after the war. They were rich, but then they were totally devastated. But that culture of discipline, of diligence, of orderliness, sacrifice for the greater good, shifted and brought recovery. By the 1960s, again, we're talking about like 15 years later, 1945, 60s, Japan's DPI is growing at over 10%. In 1964, Tokyo then hosted the Summer Olympics. By the 1980s, Japan had become the second largest economy in the world. 1980s, after all that chaos. Okay. And its systems became models of excellence, whether it was education, transportation, exports, and so on. Again, this brings out the point. It is the principles, these principles that build nations. Okay. It's the principles that build nations. And those are near examples to us. I know some of you may be Gen Zs, that some of these things look distant. I was born after the war as well, so I had to read these stories. But they're there. Fortunately, they're on record. Now, as we begin to close, I want us to face brutal facts about our country. We have an immense potential as a country, immense. God has blessed us with so much, but we have indiscipline at many levels, personal level, institutional level, family level, even national level. And they manifest in many, many ways. Some of the images that tell the story, corruption is one of those things we all talk about. And you wonder, who's corrupt? Who's corrupt? We are all pointing fingers at each other. Corruption. You hear it is in the newspapers, it is in the public speeches, it's in the political speeches, it is in our mouths. It's corruption. It's in our prayer meetings. But who is corrupt? Who's corrupt? Yes, there are some big stories out there, but we need to ask ourselves, are we corrupt? Ourselves. Am I corrupt? There have been scandals that have been famous, like the opium scandal in 2012, Was it 50 billion that was lost? Something like that. High-level indiscipline cripples public trust, okay? Transparency International, whether you believe them or not, it ranks Uganda very poorly in corruption perception. It's perception. May not be real, but it's perceived. And perception is important. If someone's coming to do business here and the candidate is perceived to be corrupt, some people just move away. So what happens? Development funds move. I've had real stories of people who came. I talked to one investor who came here with a very big project, and they got frustrated because of money. People asking for money. Everyone, permission, money. I mean, you want to take a profit out of something that has not started. That's on the big side. Let's face facts. They were not going to change unless we're praying properly, and even looking in the mirror, facing brutal facts. The other thing is the whole question of rule of law, which we've talked about, justice, selective justice, impunity, being above the law, because I'm so and so, things don't apply to me. We've heard of land evictions, unpunished violence. These things just erode trust. They erode trust. If we are praying there has to be a strong rule of law. Remember, God himself obeys his law. And then the work ethic, lateness, absenteeism, especially in schools, in hospitals, low productivity have become very normal. Without discipline, output suffers. This is something we face, which if you're an employee, that is there. There's another act of indiscipline, that's tax evasion. Whatever you think about taxation, there's things God's word also says about taxation. Under declaration of income, I hope there's no one listening to me who's doing this, smuggling, cheating the system, all these things lead. Now, never mind the other end of it. You collect the money and then it is wasted. But, do your part. That's the thing I had to come face to face with. Do your part, let God do the rest. Tax evasion is a major issue that we have faced. And by the way, it's difficult to pray for these things if you're part of the process. It becomes God doesn't listen to your prayers. So if we are praying for God to do these things in our own places, we've got to make sure that we are not doing these things. Believers stealing from organizations, political indiscipline. This one is very current. Violence, fake promises, vote buying, all these things, cause issues. They cause big issues in how society unfolds. And then moral issues, exam cheating. You need policemen. I mean, really? Policemen. I'm in the education sector, and this is something you're face to face with. Sometimes lecturers involved, cheating in exams. We have things like alcohol abuse. We have one of the highest alcohol consumption rates on the continent, if not the world. As I was driving her this morning, I went past a place near where I live. There's a place that doesn't close. Actually, I'm going to mobilize. We're in our prayer altar for the place. We have been talked about this to go and just close that place spiritually. It's a place which it's booming music all night. Whenever you drive there early morning, there are young people, they are dancing, there are girls around the place, and you wonder what's going on here. This is a gate of hell in society. But there are many places like that. You move around at 11, 9, people are packed, drinking, eating pork. You wonder, are these family people? Do they have kids waiting for them at home? So sexual exploitation, sex for marks, these are all marks of indiscipline. I've talked about traffic lawlessness as one of the signs. Over 20,000 road accidents annually, 20,000. Reason: overspeeding, drunk driving, bribery. I've said before, roads often reflect national order or lack of national order. Let's face brutal facts. And then there's public indiscipline. Queues, as basic as queues. As I said, most people will keep the queues, but you have those who just jump the queues. Lining up. You're in the bank, you're all lined up, you've been lining for 15 minutes. Some fellow walks to the front very confidently and goes in front. We need to begin resisting these things. Whenever I'm in a line, I resist it. It's one of the few things that get me that angry. As I mentioned, one time I was in a line, it was at the airport, and these young girls come and they just walk past us like we are not there. I said, excuse me, there is a line here. I made so much noise, they had to say, hey. They said, hey. Then they went back like they hadn't seen. But why do we think we shouldn't line? Why do you think we shouldn't line? Vandalism. Entebbe Express Highway, beautiful, beautiful. One of my best drives in this country, driving on the Express Highway. You enjoy the ride. There are no borders. The guys who are managing that thing fenced the place. People stole the fence. The wire, the wire. You've got to have police everywhere. They stole the fence. Now I see they're fencing again. I'm saying, how are they going to ensure people don't steal? Disregard for communal spaces. I know Entebbe, I grew up in Entebbe. I love going to Entebbe Botanical Gardens. One time I went out with my wife. We just parked the car on a quiet spot, just to have some time to reflect and so on. After a short while, another car comes, parks next to us, and they put out their speakers and begin blaring music. I said, why is there noise everywhere? Don't you, no regard for the person who was there, you just blast your noise there? Indiscipline. These things don't augur well for our future. I may sound like I'm ranting, but I'm just helping us see that, yes, as we pray for our country, let's face these things head on. Let's call upon God to bring God knows how to do it. I don't have to worry about how God answers prayer. But one of the prayers on my heart is, God, bring us back to a place of national discipline. And it could be painful, but we need it. So the consequences, development is stifled. You bring investors in, they move away. And I tell you, we've lost a lot of investors who have moved to other countries because they face problems here. And I'm telling you as somebody who knows a thing or two. I know some of them. Social trust disappears, so there's cynicism and fear. Then justice becomes transaction. It's only to those who have money or those who are connected. And what happens? Citizens begin to withdraw. They think their voice is not heard, effort does not matter. Again, this is a verse we read earlier, the Proverbs 25:28. A person without self-control is like a city without walls. It's open to destruction, shame, loss. A nation without self-control is like a nation open. Anything goes. Anything goes. And when that happens, it's the darker members of society who begin to take over. Okay. So really, some of the things to think about as we begin to wind up is, one, there has to be leadership by example everywhere you lead. I know the first thing is to look at the neighbor. What's the other person doing? But we need to ask ourselves as a starting point, even as people are praying, am I leading by example? Am I flaunting things because of who I am or because of my name? Am I doing what God doesn't do? That is lifting my name above the law. We must demonstrate integrity, living out under the laws. In the workplace, laws we enforce, no double standards. And then we've talked about families as well. Discipline begins at home. And those of you in family ministry, you're playing a very important role, because as we build strong families, we build strong nations. And education. We've seen countries that have rose out of the ashes because they focused on values in education system. The school system is one thing that brings the next generation together. As I said before, if you want to know the future of the country, just go and study what's happening in the schools. You can predict what's going to happen in the future. So that is an advantage. Take writing curricula. There's some things I'm beginning to think about writing curricula, writing things that can influence at that early age. Helping children learn responsibility, patriotism, and the dignity of labor. Those are things that can be changed at that early stage. Unfortunately, sometimes parents interfere. The school is trying to do something, then parents come and say, don't do that. I don't want that for my child. Maybe you should remove the child out of that school and find another one where they can do whatever they want, And then strengthening institutions. This is more at a higher level. We'll pray about justice, the judiciary, police force. We've been talking about law enforcement this week. These are very, very current, and the things we can work for, but also pray for. And then observance of the law enforcement consistently, not selectively. Lawbreakers are lawbreakers. They face, irrespective of status. When you begin doing that, people begin to fear. They begin to fear. And when there are compromises there's a problem. Okay. So again, some practical things for us, and individually: pay taxes, refuse bribes, learn punctuality. Doesn't matter whether others are late, just practice it, raising children with structure, with ethics, with accountability. Those of you who are still raising young children, influence. And if you're in an organization, if you're a business owner, set standards for your business or the organization you're part of. Enforce policies, reward merit, and correct wrongdoing. And then as we look at the bigger picture, the rule of law, corruption. These are things you may not have power over, but at this stage, you can at least begin praying. But start where you are. Start where you are. So in conclusion, national greatness is not inherited. It is cultivated. We can build roads, we can build bridges, we can put up buildings. We can do that in a very short time. But discipline takes generations. If we build the structures, but we don't build discipline, the people will destroy. Like the Entebbe Expressway. You build a nice road, then some fellows come and steal the fence, So it is a place we need to really put emphasis on, okay? We need to put emphasis on, okay? From There's discipline. It takes generations, passed on from leaders to citizens, from parents to children, from classrooms to even parliaments and so on. And Hebrews 12 tells us, no discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. I told you about my son. When he came back for a mid-course visitation, my God, I have that photo. The guy had lost weight. They had shaved his hair. He had a toenail which was falling off because of what? It was painful. It was painful. And then if you raise kids, you know that discipline is painful. But later on, it says it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. Peace. Now, put that in national context. No national discipline seems pleasant at the time. It's painful. Are we ready for pain? Are we ready for pain? But once it is applied later on, it produces a harvest. It produces a harvest of righteousness. Grace Ariokot, your video is on. You may want to take it off. Yeah. If you want peace, if you want justice, we must endure the discipline. We must endure this discipline. Amen. So we will round up looking at the rewards. That's what everyone wants. But we'll unpack the rewards in the next session. I really trust that God has passed a burden to you. It's a burden for action, not just prayer, but for action. It's been said you cannot enforce what you tolerate. You cannot have. When you tolerate something, you just forget it. You cannot enforce it. So may that translate to you wherever you are. Thank you very much for your attention this morning. Back to you, Anthony.
Thank you, Dr. James. Very, very clear. From my perspective here, I've really picked a lot of things, the comparison between different nations and also coming back home. There's a lot that needs to be in place. And like you have clearly said, it takes an individual like myself to be orderly, to be my self-police first before I start to critique and criticize the disorder around me. Thank you, friends. Yeah, thank you for the appreciation. I see Mr. Alex Asimwes clapping them hands, Dr. Miriam saying thank you from Joanita. Thank you, Mr. Magara, Dr. Christine Joy, thank you very much. Excellent presentation. Mr. Kagwa Joseph, thanks a lot, Dr. Magara. I don't know whether we have any from our YouTube channel. Probably the technical team will also get the comments from there. Now we can just use maybe 3 or 4 minutes if there's any feedback or question or point of clarity that you want Dr. James to clarify. Please, let's do that before I invite Pastor Peter Omo to take us through the prayer response. Annette Kai Shaza says, thank you so much, Dr. Magara, for sharing. God bless you. God bless you. Thank you from Dr. Catherine B. And Lydia is also saying, thanks a lot, Dr. Magara. Charlotte Babazi says, wow, wow, wow. Thank you. Thank you. Chinya even says, good teacher. Amazing. Fred Nalgoda, thank you so much. Be blessed. Looks like this has sunk in because I see a lot of thank you. Thank you. Maybe I'll just ask before we pray, what has been your key take from this session of discipline? We are talking about national discipline, but I'm certain a nation is made by people. What do you pick from today, you as a person? What's the practical thing that you have been provoked to consider doing? As that is being thought through, I will read Anita Biambara's comment. She says, the burden the Lord has placed on me is a cleaner environment. I see trash, polythene bags, used diapers everywhere, where one is walking. but not sure how to action. I think that's exactly what you're asking. How do we action that, Anita? We need to find solutions, even if it's divine, may the Lord guide you. Florence says you can't enforce. Okay, I think there are quite many here. Yeah, he says you can't enforce what you tolerate. Oh, right there. Thank you, Florence. Esther Ruth. Thank you very much, Dr. Magara. How do we change parents' mindset to train children? Allow the community to discipline children. Okay, I think that's a question that we'll come to later quickly. Let me first read the other comments. Without discipline, I cannot grow and my family. Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Joseph. Namsif Penina says, thank you so much. Linda, greatly insightful. Thank you so much. Whatever, Helen, discipline starts with me in all my roles. Clear. Susan, a clear reminder to live a life of integrity. Ruth and Jairus, leadership is a very key factor in national discipline. Joanita, introspection. Before I expect discipline, am I disciplined? How is it back in my home? What's going on in my neighborhood and community? Then Grace Ariokot says, thank you so much, but our children to take on for the children discipline. Don't know whether that's very clear. Maybe you say you pray that our children take on. Pam Ibenyat says, leading by example is key to discipline. Kamuntu, thank you, Doctor. I would also think that in addition to prayer, if as Christian we also started applying what we have said, would bring the reformation. We have been challenged as Christians this morning. Yes. Yeah, too much of being Christian now, rather so much, not too much. Discipline starts with me as an individual. Florence K says, Joseph says, as a parent, I need to let our school discipline our children. Yes. Percy, emphasizing values over marks in schools. Right. Alex, the time it took to rebuild these devastated countries to rebuild through discipline, 20 years, it's amazing. And from YouTube, Nathan Balikowa says, an excellent presentation. We need collective conviction of the need for discipline at all levels. Robert Mutiaba, my take home is that without discipline, infrastructure won't last long or serve purpose. Joseph says, as I learn, then I take to my household. Amazing. Naveta Loilo Lume says, I need to insist on discipline in institutions the Lord has given me to lead or influence. Thank you, Mr. Naveta. And Lillian says, national discipline is not inherited but cultivated. Yes, I saw that remark. Dr. Helen Christine Amonjin says, there is no gain without pain. Yeah, that was the conclusion there. Rita O says, I have been affirmed for instilling discipline at home. Wow. Okay, that's what I was going to say. We are collecting offertory on that. Lois says, got a fresh burden for those in my network who are into heavy alcohol consumption. That's a good burden. And may the Lord give you divine wisdom. Ahumuza Ian says, what's the difference between tax avoidance and tax evasion? Okay. Probably that's also to do with discipline. We shall talk about that. Discipline begins with me. I need more information about OCID leadership course. Where can we go for that 3 months course? Okay, I think that's the OXID. Okay, I think that there's a comment. Oh, there are some questions here. Let me just start with the first one, Dr. James, so that we don't lose it out. It was from Ruth. He says, how do we change parents' mindsets to train children and to allow the community to discipline the children? It's the first one.
I don't think we necessarily have to, the thing of collectivism, where that happens, it happens in the culture. The culture has changed, but sensitization, parents, again, that's why I really applaud those who are doing the family ministry, schools. In our own school, we have we had to start parenting seminars. We thought we'd just train the children. We realized in a short time we had to train the parents as well. So that has to happen. Well, wherever you have opportunity, churches have a very big part to play. Churches have a very big part to play. I often wonder what we are teaching in our churches. Because this is where we grow. Whatever we missed out growing up, we can catch up in churches, we can catch up in schools. So it's in those kind of spaces. I learned a lot. I learned a lot from, what was being taught in my church. Yeah. So it is teaching the word, discipling the nation, discipling families. How that works out, again, there are people who have a bigger platform. They use your platforms. Well, God has given me many platforms. I try and use them for, advancing the principles of the kingdom. Use your platforms. I'll leave it at that, Anthony.
Did you refer to OCID leadership course?
No, I think it's talking about OCID leadership. OCID leadership is a 6 months, it's not 3 months. That is not a military training. No, it isn't. But I know even now those who are interested in military training can get training. You can go to Chankwanzi or whatever if you're interested. There are ways you can do that. But what I was advocating more for is I do really hope that national service comes back to this country. Whereby before students go to university, they first go for either 6 months or 1 year of that kind of training. I think it will have a very big impact. Of course, always the content is important, but I know one of the key things that the military does is discipline. In the military, you see our military, you don't ask too many questions. One of the things they teach you is not to ask too many questions, to follow commands, and I think there's a benefit in that. We are in a generation where you question everything, and so it's very difficult to govern. Very difficult. Content matters, of course, but yeah, certainly that's but the OCID program is different. The link can be shared on the WhatsApp groups. Here, where you can get the OCID training. It is just a sensitization on responsibility for our responsibility to our country, our nations.
Okay, we'll just talk about these two and then we'll pray. What is your view on human rights rules coming from the West that are affecting our country's traditional values being taken away? And then the other is the difference between national reformation and national transformation.
There's a third one too, which I need to comment about on taxes, but let's take one by one. Filter everything. Filter everything. There are things coming from the West, which they themselves are benefited from, which they are turning around. For example, right now we have the things in the law now, so they're in the law where corporal punishment is forbidden. You're not supposed to discipline your child. That sort of thing has produced a lawless generation. Now, I know it has been abused, but sometimes these things are smuggled into our laws. It's been abused in some places, but the generation that is brought up under discipline, you get a better nation. The West now has a generation which is just lawless in many ways. Now, the West is very general, very broad term, I know, because there's some countries we're talking about that are organized and disciplined. But everything needs to be filtered under the Torah, the things we've been studying about this past 6 weeks. Yeah. What's the second one, Anthony?
National transformation, national reformation.
Okay, transformation, by the way, is transformation. You can transform to anything. You can transform from good to bad. So I know we use the positive context. Now you can talk about economic transformation, whereby the economy improves, and most of us think about it that way, and that is a good thing. But as we've said, if you build structures, you build roads, you put up buildings, you put up bridges, you put up all these things, but you do not have this inner thing, the soul, which is discipline, people are going to destroy them. People are going to destroy them. Right now we're having elections, and I'm glad I'm not seeing posters on walls. I hope it stays that way, because someone paints his wall, and then some other fellow comes and plasters the whole wall with posters, and then goes away. Now, the person who painted his wall has to go through the pain of cleaning the wall and through personal cost. I mean, What is that? So I'm kind of going off track here, but transformation has to do with changing things, changing things from maybe economic, it may be political, it may be this, but we're talking about discipline. Discipline undergirds all that. It undergirds that. It means that if you put up that fence, no one is going to steal it. Recently, there was the meeting where the first lady was speaking, and she said in Japan, if you lost your wallet somewhere, this country is, I think, only 2% Christian, 1 or 2% Christian. You lost your wallet, you will get it back. We had an experience some years back where my wife was moving through Dubai. Dubai is an Islamic state. She left her bag at a checkpoint. It had money in it. Then later, because she was moving, we were younger, the kids were younger, so they was moving the children. She forgot the bag. She ran back, like maybe 20 minutes later, the bag was there. But she's made a statement, my first lady made a statement. In our churches, if you leave your phone and look away, you may not find it. So we are talking about discipline. That undergirds everything. It will safeguard all our progress. You can make so much progress, but if there is no discipline, it will be destroyed. So it will be short-lived. And that's why this is even more important. So reformation, we're talking about reformation coming beyond transformation. It goes into the morals. It goes into the unseen parts. So it's like the invisible parts which uphold what you want to see in public. Yeah? You can have beautiful roads, but there are so many accidents because people are not keeping the road traffic rules. So this goes deeper. The other question had to do with tax avoidance and tax evasion. Tax avoidance is legal. That means in the law, you find out, for example, that what example can I give? That if I buy food for my staff when they're in the workplace, it is tax deductible. It's an expense. So instead of giving them an allowance, which when I give them an allowance as cash to buy food, they are going to tax that allowance. The law taxes the allowance. And if I give them cash, I must pay the taxes. But if I give them food, they still benefit the same way, but it is not taxed on them. And it's also a tax deductible. So it is really understanding the tax laws. And for that to happen, you need to have a tax consultant, somebody who understands the laws, who will tell you when you do it this way, it is legal. When you do it the other way, it's illegal. You are avoiding taxes, that is legal. But tax evasion is where you are supposed to do something and you not do it. It's illegal. You'll not be taken to court for tax avoidance, but you'll be taken to court for tax evasion.